I am a brother to dragons and a companion to owls. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. My harp also is turned to mourning, and my organ into the voice of them that weep. Job 30:29 through 30:31. If you've never been to Christian Bible study, or maybe even if you have, you may not have recognized the origin of the title of this minisode. One of the things Good Omens does well is deconstruct Western religion, specifically certain stories and themes in the Bible, and explore all of the exposed parts. Neil has said that this minisode is essential to the entire Good Omens conversation, including Aziraphale's part. So the question I would like to ask for this analysis is simple. Why? Why is a companion to owls so essential to Good Omens, and specifically to Aziraphale? The traditional themes in the book of Job are centered around faith and suffering. Let's take a look at how a companion to owls takes these traditional themes apart, rifles around inside, and then puts them back together into an important narrative for the characters with reinterpreted themes that run throughout the show. And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Job 1:8.
I mean, he really is an absolute poppet.
I think it's important to remember that these minisodes are presented to us as Aziraphale's memories. Now, that doesn't mean these events themselves are unreliable, just that we must understand the lens through which the events are being recalled. The book of Job concerns a man whose faith in God survives, undiminished, through extreme loss and suffering. It's used to teach that faith in God can and must persevere through hardship, and how hardship can even make that faith stronger. Naturally, Good Omens takes this entire idea and turns it on its head. Crowley is unwilling from the very beginning to harm kids. Hell may very well punish him, but obedience is not something Crowley has ever excelled at. He does what he thinks is right, regardless of the consequences to himself. Aziraphale, on the other hand, is terrified of the consequences of disobeying heaven, but he is also extremely distressed when he learns that heaven is just washing its hands of the blood of children. Aziraphale is unwilling to simply turn his back while terrible things happen to a good man and his family. As I established in an earlier video, Aziraphale's ring is an important representation of his angelic identity. Whenever he feels conflicted between heaven and his own ideas, he touches the ring. And he fiddles with his ring constantly in this minisode, demonstrating that inner conflict. When he's talking to Muriel about the contract, when he's talking to Gabriel and Michael about the contract, and when he's telling Crowley he doesn't think killing kids is what God wants. In the end, when the time comes to make the hard choice, Aziraphale chooses to thwart the will of God. For this, he feels certain he will be punished. In previous videos, I've said that Aziraphale willingly sacrifices himself here, and that's not wrong. But after reading the book of Job and a number of scholarly interpretations and rewatching this minisode multiple times and thinking about these specific themes, it occurred to me that Aziraphale is actively taking on Job's role in the story and willingly taking the burden of suffering onto himself. Unlike Job in the Bible, he does thwart God, even though he doesn't curse her or turn against her, even in the face of his own destruction. Here we find our first subversion of the biblical themes. Where Job in the Bible is a lesson in accepting tragedy and suffering as the will of God, Aziraphale is willing to take the suffering onto himself by challenging the will of God. By asserting his own morals, not above God, but in place of them, he prevents the suffering of others. He isn't just sacrificing himself, but something dearly precious to him, his angelic identity, and something he might not even realize in the moment that he's losing, his innocence. In trading his own innocence to save the life of these children, he shows he is willing to take on the suffering that he sees stemming from that sacrifice in order to save Job and Sidis and the children from bearing that burden instead. Aziraphale isn't the only one thwarting the wills of upper management, though. Crowley actively stops Sidis from cursing God, which would have likely led to Satan winning the bet. We don't know if Crowley is ever punished for this act, but the point is that he took the risk of punishment in order to save Sidis and Job from God's wrath. Biblically speaking, Job's friends, or comforters, are pretty awful to him, telling him that he must have done something to deserve God's punishment. They also insinuate that the children must have deserved to die. Subverting that narrative as well, Crowley is the only comforter, as Bildad the Shuhite, and he fulfills this role quite differently. Instead of punishing Job further and condemning the children, he saves the children, which of course provides the ultimate comfort to Job and Sidis. In the Bible, continued obedience to God provides comfort to Job during his suffering. But for both Crowley and Aziraphale, disobedience prevents the suffering from happening in the first place. In the biblical story, Job is tested twice by God. First, the destruction of his property, and second, the destruction of his family and his health. He loses everything.
His camels, his goat, his oxen, his children, his geese.
Is what?
Including his children. And although God does reward him with double the worldly riches, his children remain quite dead. Now, the deconstruction. In this minisode, Aziraphale's faith is also tested twice. Once in Crowley.
Are you sure, Angel?
Yes. Quite sure.
And again when he must choose between what he has been told is right and what he knows is right. This second test is a little more complicated because it's set up to make it seem to Aziraphale that it is his faith in God and God's plan that is being tested. From this perspective, the audience might think he failed. He certainly seems to believe he's failed the test, which causes him deep personal suffering, though his suffering would surely be worse if he wasn't true to himself, if he'd let the children die. But if you view it in a way that deconstructs the original theme, you can see it's really a test of faith in himself. This is the harder test for him by far. It causes the first real cracks in his foundational belief in God's plan in order to pass this test. But he does pass it, and in doing so, saves innocent, blameless lives and gains the seeds of something else far more spiritual and meaningful than the worldly riches bestowed on Job, the ability to trust himself and other people, a step towards faith in his own reasoning, and the ability to disobey. So the message of faith is both deconstructed and reinforced. Aziraphale learns to have faith through adversity, but it is not blind faith. Instead, it's faith that is learned and earned over millennia, faith in himself and faith in others, something he's going to need desperately in the near future. Owls are solitary creatures. Their voices echo mournfully in the night. They are alone, as Job was alone in his grief in the Bible. By the end of the episode, we find a devastated Aziraphale sitting by the beach. Perhaps he's here to look at the sea and the sun and the sky one last time before being taken to hell. He's taken on Job's suffering, seen the first cracks in his faith in God widen, and willingly given up his identity as an angel to save the lives of a few mortals, two of them a bit bratty. He has lost some of his own innocence in order to save the life of 3 innocent children. Crowley, continuing the role he has taken on with Job, seeks out Aziraphale on the beach. He's not here to take Aziraphale to hell, but to provide him with comfort. Aziraphale insists Crowley must take him to hell because he believes if he takes one step away from obedience and faith, that he is no longer an angel, and with his black and white thinking he concludes he must then be a demon, a fallen angel. When Crowley says he won't take him to hell, Aziraphale doesn't know what to do with this information that doesn't fit neatly into his boxes labeled good and evil. Aziraphale has begun to realize that he's different. He doesn't fit in with the other angels in heaven, and he's not a fallen angel or a demon either. This sense of separation must be terribly isolating for him. He doesn't know who or what he is, or how to define himself. Floundering for an answer to help him find that sense of self, he asks a question.
But what am I?
He's always looked to God and heaven for that answer. Now he looks to Crowley.
You're just an angel who goes along with heaven as far as he can.
And Crowley's answer creates a new space for him to exist, where he's still an angel, where he doesn't have to completely abandon his identity, an in-between space where they can exist together. Although that answer gave him this gray area to exist in for a time, Aziraphale still hasn't received a satisfactory answer to the question, what am I? I think that's because he's seeking the answer outside of himself, needing that external validation.
It's nice to tell someone about the good things you've done, now that I'm not reporting to heaven.
But it isn't up to God or heaven to define him, and it isn't up to Crowley. Now he's on his own, soon to face another crisis of identity, and he's going to have to realize that the only person who can define who he really is himself. Can we now answer this question? Why is a companion to owls so essential to Good Omens, and specifically to Aziraphale? Aziraphale thought he was giving up his identity. but instead he was just beginning to learn to redefine it. He thought he was taking on the burden of suffering, but in doing so, he alleviated the suffering of others. He believed he was losing his faith, but in reality, he was only transferring it to Crowley and to himself. He thought he was choosing a path of loneliness, but instead he found a kindred spirit. I am a brother to dragons and a companion to owls. The biblical Job uses this phrase to mean that in his grief and suffering, he had become like the owl, solitary, alone, crying mournfully to an empty and uncaring night. Good Omens takes this biblical phrase and turns it completely around. Crowley has been alone on earth, not fitting in with heaven or hell for thousands of years, alone with his own suffering. But he is no longer alone in this gray area that he's created. An angel has joined him. They sit a little distance apart, silently contemplating the vast ocean ahead of them. Aziraphale has Crowley, and he now has Aziraphale, his companion to owls. Everywhere I look in this show, I see bookends and mirrors, themes that start and tie beginning and ending together. This is called chiastic structure. Season 2 is full of it, in scenes, in episodes, from the first episode to the last. And here is another, their relationship, a beginning and an ending reflected.
You look me in the eye and tell me.
Tell me you said no.
I strongly suspect there will be more of this story structure in Season 3, scenes and themes that mirror those from Season 2. Will there be another look me in the eye moment in Season 3? What other parallels do you think we might see? During the Battle of the Bookshop, Aziraphale removes his halo and uses it to clear the shop of demons to protect Maggie, Nina, and Jim. It seems to be somewhat physically painful, or at least difficult for him to remove it. He also looks a little ashamed or embarrassed when Crowley pokes fun at him for using it. Aziraphale blowing up his halo strikes me as another symbolic gesture of his willingness to destroy his angelic identity to save people, even though it hurts him to do it. I don't know, it just seems to have a lot of significance. Regarding the magic shop still photo, I've seen all the comments about tarot cards, and I've seen the fact that Amazon is releasing an official tarot card deck. Instead of addressing this single shot and the possibly related cards right now, I'm going to poke around some and see if there are more possible tarot clues hiding in plain sight. Please feel free to do the same. The Discord server is open. Come on in, we're all having fun. If you like what I'm doing here, please check out my Patreon. And speaking of, thank you to all my new patrons this week, especially to my first new super patron, Maddie Mon. All of you are helping to make all of this possible. And as always, thanks for watching.